So this is a picture of the eSports athlete Sky, and he's carrying the Olympic torch as it made its way to Beijing for the 2008 Olympics. And you know, this picture is really significant because it shows the manner in which the government is committing to promoting esports as an actual competitive sport. But to me, it also raises questions, because I've looked at internet gaming and internet addiction and discourses surrounding these things for quite some time. And to me, it raises the question, you know, how do we separate the healthy games from the unhealthy games? And what distinguishes an esports athlete from an internet game addict? So I'm not going to talk about methodology much because nobody really cares. Basically the idea is boundary work, looking at the differences between different kinds of gamers and gaming practices. And the thing that I found interesting is that a lot of the gamers that I was talking to about internet gaming were actually vehemently denying the fact that they were playing internet games at all. And you know, to me, I'm looking at these games and I'm saying, well, you're playing them on the internet, you're connecting with people in other areas, how are these not internet games? And they said, oh no, these are eSports. So that's the crux there. So the overview is that in this presentation, I'm going to argue that the Chinese government is actually cultivating a notion of what I call patriotic leisure. And you know, patriotic leisure follows a dual logic. Internationally, it's aimed at increasing China's image and soft power. And nationally, it's aimed at creating the ideal young citizen, a self-enterprising, skill-building professional who's also committed to acting in the best interests of the socialist state. And this concept of patriotic leisure is actually borrowed from Lisa Hoffman's notion of the patriotic professional. But what I want to demonstrate here are the ways in which work and leisure are actually linked. Okay. So let me first explain very quickly what esports are. So broadly speaking, esports involve a number of different games. They can really be any genre of digital game that's played competitively, either one-on-one or in small teams. And usually, a game gains acceptance as a professional esports when it's included in the register of an international competition, such as the World Cyber Games. And here you see a picture of the World Cyber Games in 2009 that was hosted in Chengdu. And you know, the Chinese government has actually declared as of 2003 that esports is actually a professional sport that will be recognized. Now, there's just three terms that we need to keep track of here. One is danji yoshi, which technically means a PC game or a single computer game. But as I'll show, actually what's happening is that a lot of these danji yoshis are currently being played as guangduo yoshi. They're being played through the internet. But nonetheless, people continue to call them danji yoshi. And they say danji yoshi are esports, where internet games are not esports. And actually, you know, one of the other things I want to point out, of course, is that this is quite an inaccurate and disingenuous rhetorical construction, right? Because, in fact, internet games such as World of Warcraft have for some time been played competitively and included in the register of esports. Okay, so what separates the internet game from esports? Oh, the formatting came off a little strange here thanks to the Mac issue, but okay, so basically the point is that these Beijing officials and officials in the Center for Sports Administration in China are saying that esports is a sport and we have to keep it strictly separated from unhealthy internet games, right? And people draw these distinctions, you can't see the third one there, but it's based upon the investment of time, money, it's based upon skill, and then, where's my last one? It's also based upon the idea of individual competition versus group cooperation, okay? And they say that esports don't require a lot of time, they don't require a lot of money, but they do require skill. And they require you to be an individual competitor. Whereas these internet games, you know, you can just spend some money, waste some time, you know, use no skill whatsoever, you know, and we're good to go, okay? It's all about group cooperation. Okay, now one of the major problems, of course, is that esports do not gross much money, whereas internet games do. They make quite a lot of money. In fact, the most recent statistics said that internet games in 2011 brought in $5.8 billion in revenue, with a growth rate of 21.4%, which outstrips the growth rate of the national GDP. Okay, so this clearly poses a quandary for the government. You know, we want to separate between healthy esports and unhealthy internet games, but internet games are the moneymaker. Okay, so looking at both international and national aims. Internationally, what I want to argue is that the Chinese government is interested in including these games because they want to increase their soft power abroad. They want to become part of what I'm calling East Asian techno-pool, which is this notion of Japan, you know, has been a producer of play fantasies that are engaging people around the world, and South Korea and Japan have been seen as leaders in the games industry. By contrast, China is always seen as lagging behind in this cultural industry. And so, in order to address this, the Chinese government is pushing these games with Chinese characteristics. And I would read this quote, but I don't have time. But basically the idea is, World of Warcraft, an American game, has a Chinese, an American version of a dragon. But in the Chinese version, we are the descendants of the dragon, so that should be a good thing, right? Not a bad thing. But the American version is going to turn it into a bad thing. All right. Now, turning very quickly to domestic policy, I want to talk about the way in which we get to this notion of the patriotic professional and patriotic leisure. Okay, now domestic game policy is a bit tricky because the state has to contend with the negative attention that surrounds internet games as well as discourses of internet addiction. And elsewhere I've talked about the way in which games get constructed as a form of opium for the spirit, 精神鸦片. So, you know, there is therefore this counter effort to promote games that can be seen as building an ideal citizenry. Okay, and notably these notions of ideal citizenship have actually changed over time. You know, we can look at the Confucian notion of the gentleman, the Cultural Revolution notion of the model worker. And what Lisa Hoffman talks about is the notion of the patriotic professional. Okay, the notion of this neoliberal mentality, the, you know, self-enterprising, self-disciplining young individual who goes out and, you know, acts in the interests of the market. But in Lisa's version, we're talking about, you know, this happening under the guise of the late socialist state. So it combines a neoliberal mentality with also this mentality of continuing to act in the best interest of the Chinese state. So what I want to show is that we can actually see how, you know, free time is connected to this neoliberal mode of governing. Okay, and that, you know, throughout history there have been plenty of scholars who have looked at the ways in which, you know, the governments and the ways in which, you know, free time and leisure culture are connected to these issues of ideal citizens. Jing Wang, who's here, has talked about culture leisure campaigns in Beijing in the 90s. Okay, but the point is that I met a number of young people, the ones who claimed that what they were playing were esports and not internet games, who talked about gaming along the same lines as these patriotic professionals. So whereas patriotic professionals stressed the importance of finding jobs that would allow their abilities to flourish, you know, and would allow them to, sorry, I missed the English there, to 锻炼自己, or to exercise themselves, you know, many of the young college students, the gamers that I spoke to, they stressed the importance of playing games that would allow them to study, to 学习, and to 开发自己的大脑, or, you know, allow their intellect to flourish. Okay, so the point of all this is that despite all these efforts to keep them separate, esports and internet games actually are blurred in a number of ways. One of the most important things that I'll point out here, and I think I only have time to point out this one thing, is that, for example, CIRC, the State Administration of Radio, Film, and Television, actually bans esports from being broadcast on television. Now, why is that? You know, technically, the ban is on internet games, on online games, but they actually include esports in this register of banned sports programs, banned game programs. So, you know, clearly the boundaries between these two, you know, are mutable, and they're not as clear as the state would like to have us think. You know, and it's clear here that we can see that these games and the way in which the government is framing healthy versus unhealthy games is doing a kind of ideological work. The end.